What happens when you judge a book by its cover, only to find out it's a first edition masterpiece personally signed by the author. In a world of glass ceilings and unspoken biases, one woman was about to shatter them both. In the polished, sterile environment of an airport's first-class lounge, a man in a $1,000 suit made a fatal mistake. He looked at a brilliant black woman, Dr. Alara Vance, and saw only someone who didn't belong. His words, dripping with condescension, were simple. "Excuse me, this line is for executives only." He had no idea he wasn't just talking to an executive. He was talking to the visionary who owned the entire chessboard, and his next move would be his last. Stay tuned as we unfold the story of how a single dismissive comment led to the most epic, satisfying karmic takedown you will ever hear. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 8 was a familiar symphony of controlled chaos. The low hum of conversations, the rhythmic click-clack of roller bags on polished marble, and the distant, almost mournful call of a boarding announcement for a flight to Zurich. For Dr. Alara Vance, it was just another Tuesday, another airport, another leg in the relentless marathon of running a global technology empire. She stood patiently in the priority boarding line for American Airlines flagship first class. Dressed in a tailored navy blue pantsuit that was understated yet screamed bespoke, and a pair of simple but elegant Rothy's flats designed for both comfort and boardrooms, she exuded a quiet, unshakable confidence. Her hair was styled in intricate micro-twists, pulled back into a sophisticated low bun. In her hand, she held a slim carbon fiber laptop case containing the schematics for what could be her company's magnum opus, the Helios Project. Alara was the founder and CEO of Etheria Innovations, a company at the bleeding edge of sustainable energy solutions. She hadn't inherited a fortune. She had built one from a dorm room idea, a mountain of student debt, and a refusal to accept the word no. At 38, she held more patents than most corporations collected in a decade, and was on the cusp of finalizing a multi-billion-dollar contract that would revolutionize energy grids across Europe. This trip to the Geneva Global Tech Summit was the final presentation, the victory lap. The line moved slowly. Ahead of her, a man in his early 50s was loudly complaining into his phone about the incompetence of his marketing department. He was the archetype of corporate entitlement, a crisp, expensive suit that looked stiff and uncomfortable, a gleaming Rolex Submarino on his wrist, and a face flushed with the self-importance of a man who had never been told he was wrong. When he finally finished his call, snapping his leather-bound phone case shut with a theatrical flourish, he turned. His gaze swept past the people in front of him and landed squarely on Alara. He scanned her from head to toe, his lips tightening into a sneer of disapproval. There was no flicker of recognition, no simple courtesy of a fellow traveler. There was only assessment and immediate, dismissive judgment. He took a half step out of the line, blocking her path, just as she was about to move forward. He leaned in his voice a low, conspiratorial murmur that was somehow louder and more insulting than a shout. "Excuse me," he said, his tone that of a man correcting a lost child. "I think you might be in the wrong place. This line—" He gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist at the priority access sign, "is for executive platinum and first-class members only. The main cabin boarding is further down the terminal." Alara froze. It wasn't the first time she had faced such an assumption, but the sheer, unadulterated audacity of it still managed to land like a physical blow. The world seemed to slow down. She could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above feel the slight vibration of a jet taxiing on the tarmac outside. She held his gaze, her expression unreadable, a mask of calm she had perfected over years of navigating rooms where she was the only one who looked like her. "I believe I'm in the right place," she said, her voice even and cool, a stark contrast to the simmering rage coiling in her gut. The man who she would soon learn was named Gregory Sterling. Actually chuckled. It was a dry, grating sound. "Look, I'm just trying to save you some embarrassment. Brenda," he called out to the gate agent, a harried-looking woman with tired eyes. "We seem to have a lost passenger." Brenda glanced over her face, a mixture of professional strain and annoyance at being dragged into a confrontation. Greg Sterling turned back to Alara, his smile widening into a smirk. "There's no need to try and jump the queue. We all have to wait our turn. Just, in our designated places." He gestured vaguely towards the back of the airport, as if banishing her to the land of the common folk. The insult was multi-layered and venomous. It wasn't just that he assumed she couldn't afford a first-class ticket. It was the implication that she was trying to cheat, to take something that wasn't hers, that her very presence in this exclusive space was a transgression. He hadn't just questioned her ticket. He had questioned her right to exist in his world. Alara took a slow, deliberate breath. She could have pulled out her boarding pass, a sleek digital QR code on her phone that read, "Vance Alara, seat 1A first." She could have eviscerated him with a list of her credentials, her net worth, the very fact that her company's market cap could probably buy the mid-level manufacturing firm he likely worked for 10 times over. But she didn't. In that moment, a different idea began to form. An idea born of years of quiet frustration, of biting her tongue and taking the high road. The high road, she realized, was a lonely, unsatisfying path. Today she was going to forge a new one. She simply gave him a small, enigmatic smile. "Thank you for your concern," she said, her voice dangerously soft. "But I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The game had just begun, and Gregory Sterling had no idea he was already in checkmate. Brenda, the gate agent, approached her sensible shoes, squeaking softly on the floor. Her name tag was slightly askew. She looked from Greg's smug face to Alara's serene one, clearly wishing she were anywhere else. "Is there a problem here, sir?" she asked, her voice weary. "Yes, Brenda," Greg said, oozing a familiar condescension that suggested he knew her name, not out of respect but to assert dominance. "This lady seems to be confused about the boarding process. I explained that this is the priority line, but she's insistent." He gestured towards Alara as if she were a piece of misplaced luggage. The other passengers in the line were now fully engaged. A few averted their eyes, feigning interest in their phones, but their subtle shifts in posture betrayed their attention. A younger man in a designer hoodie looked uncomfortable. An older woman with pearls clutched her carry-on a little tighter, her expression one of stern disapproval, though at whom it was directed was unclear. Brenda turned to Alara. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass, please?" It was a reasonable request, the standard operating procedure, but in this context, layered with Greg's prejudice, it felt like an accusation. Alara met the agent's tired eyes and saw not malice, but exhaustion. This woman was just trying to get through her shift to de-escalate a situation manufactured by a bully. Slowly, deliberately, Alara raised her phone. She didn't just flash the screen. She held it steady, the brilliant OLED display showing her name and seat assignment in stark, undeniable clarity. Vance Alara. Flight 88 to GVA, Seat 1A. Flagship first. A hush fell over the immediate area. Greg Sterling's smug grin faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then disbelief. He leaned in, squinting at the screen as if it might be a forgery. The letters remained crisp and unwavering. 1A. The throne seat. Brenda, the gate agent's professionalism, clicked back into place, a subtle wave of relief washing over her features. "Thank you, ma'am. My apologies." She shot a withering glare at Greg. "Sir, please return to your place in line." The air crackled with unspoken tension. Greg's face, which had been a florid pink, began to deepen to a blotchy crimson. He had been so certain, so confident in his assessment of the world and Alara's place in it. To be proven so publicly, so definitively wrong, was an ego blow he clearly wasn't equipped to handle. But instead of apologizing, he doubled down. Pride, a toxic and blinding force, took over. "Well," he sputtered, searching for a way to salvage his authority. "It's just surprising. You don't often see people getting corporate travel benefits like this unless they're senior executives." The pause was infinitesimal, but the meaning was colossal. "People like you." Alara finally allowed a sliver of the ice in her veins to show. "What is it exactly that you find so surprising, Mr.?" She let the question hang in the air, forcing him to identify himself. "Sterling. Gregory Sterling," he said, puffing out his chest. "I'm the Senior Vice President of Logistics for Stalwart Dynamics. We're a Fortune 500 company. I'm very familiar with corporate travel policies." He said the name of his company as if it were a royal title. Stalwart Dynamics. The name hit Alara like a bolt of lightning. It was not just some random company. Stalwart Dynamics was Etheria Innovations' chief rival in the bid for the Helios project. They were the old guard, the fossil fuel logistics behemoth, trying to pivot to green energy using their immense capital to muscle out innovators like her. And Gregory Sterling, this pompous, prejudiced fool, was their senior VP. The universe, it seemed, had a flair for the dramatic. This was no longer a personal slight. This was a corporate clash. This man was not just an ignorant bully. He was the competition. And he had just handed her a weapon she hadn't even known she needed. Her enigmatic smile returned, but this time it held a sharp, dangerous edge. "Stalwart Dynamics," she repeated, her voice musical. "I've heard of them. You're based out of Houston, right? Specializing in legacy energy transport." The way she said legacy made it sound like fossilized. Greg narrowed his eyes, sensing the shift in power, but not understanding its source. "We're a global leader in industrial logistics." "I see," Alara said, her gaze sweeping over him one last time. "Well, Mr. Sterling, it's been illuminating." With a nod to the gate agent, she stepped forward. Brenda scanned her phone with an apologetic smile. "Enjoy your flight, Dr. Vance." The title hung in the air, another small, satisfying dart. Dr. Vance. As Alara walked down the jet bridge, she didn't look back. She could feel Greg Sterling's stare burning into her back, a mixture of fury, humiliation, and confusion. He had tried to put her in her place, but in doing so he had revealed his own, and he had unwittingly shown her exactly where to strike. The flight to Geneva was no longer just a business trip. It was a declaration of war. The flagship first cabin was an oasis of calm. Alara settled into seat 1A, a spacious pod of leather and polished chrome, and accepted a glass of champagne from the flight attendant. The hiss of the bubbles was a counterpoint to the racing of her mind. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger was a hot, messy emotion. What she felt now was cold, clear, and focused. It was the feeling she got when she was solving a complex quantum mechanics problem or identifying a fatal flaw in a competitor's design. It was the feeling of a huntress who had just caught the scent of her prey. A few minutes later, Liam, her chief of staff and trusted confidant, slid into the seat across the aisle. Liam was a sharp, impeccably dressed man in his early 30s, with a mind like a steel trap and a loyalty to Alara that was absolute. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing the tension in her shoulders. "I saw that guy giving you a hard time at the gate." Alara took a slow sip of her champagne. "That guy," she said, her voice low, "was Gregory Sterling, Senior VP of Logistics for Stalwart Dynamics." Liam's eyes widened. "You're kidding me. What are the odds?" "I'm starting to think the odds have very little to do with it," Alara mused. "He informed me with great confidence that I was in the wrong line, that the priority line was, and I quote, for executives only." Liam winced. "Oh no, he didn't." "He did," Alara confirmed, "and he didn't stop there. He painted a whole narrative in which I was a confused, possibly devious little woman trying to sneak into a place where I didn't belong." "I'm so sorry, Alara," Liam said, his voice laced with genuine empathy. He'd been with her since the early days of Etheria and had witnessed countless microaggressions and outright acts of racism and sexism she'd had to endure. "Don't be sorry," Alara said, a flicker of steel in her eyes. "Be prepared. He just handed us an opportunity on a silver platter." The plane began its powerful pushback from the gate. Alara watched the terminal lights of JFK recede, the world outside becoming a blur. "He's the public face of their logistics division," she thought aloud. "The Helios project is at its core the largest and most complex sustainable energy logistics contract ever conceived. It's about building a new circulatory system for an entire continent's power grid. And Stalwart's Senior VP of Logistics is a man who makes critical business decisions based on shallow, prejudiced assumptions." Liam was already catching on his fingers, flying across the screen of his tablet. His worldview is a liability. He can't see what's right in front of him. If he misjudges a person so badly, how would he manage the unforeseen complexities of a project like Helios? "Exactly," Alara said. "Stalwart's entire pitch is that they are the safe, established choice, that their legacy systems and decades of experience make them reliable, stable, stalwart. But what if their leadership culture isn't stalwart at all? What if it's brittle, arrogant, and blind to the modern world?" The plane roared down the runway and lifted into the night sky, the lights of New York City spreading out below them like a carpet of scattered diamonds. "Liam," Alara said, her voice now crisp and commanding, "I need you to do a deep dive. I want to know everything about Gregory Sterling, his professional history, his social media presence, any interviews he's given, any articles he's written. I'm looking for a pattern. I need to know if the man at the gate is the man in the boardroom." "On it," Liam confirmed, his brow furrowed in concentration. "And I want you to research the board of directors for the Helios Project Consortium. Specifically, I need a full workup on Marcus Thorne." Marcus Thorne was the legendary, almost mythical chairman of the consortium, a titan of European industry. He was old school, a man who valued handshakes over algorithms, and was said to base his biggest decisions as much on the character of the people he was doing business with as on the numbers in their proposals. "I need to know what he values," Alara continued. "His pet peeves, his passions. Does he have a foundation? What does he talk about in his public addresses? Integrity, innovation, legacy. I'll have a complete psychological and professional profile on him before we land," Liam promised. Alara leaned back in her seat, the plan crystallizing. This wasn't about public shaming. A viral video or an angry tweet would be a temporary victory, a sugar rush of outrage that would fade. She was playing a much bigger game. She wasn't going to just expose Gregory Sterling's prejudice. She was going to frame it as a catastrophic business risk. She was going to demonstrate to Marcus Thorne and the world that the kind of thinking Sterling represented wasn't just morally bankrupt, it was fiscally suicidal in the 21st century. Greg Sterling thinks in boxes, Alara said more to herself than to Liam. He saw a black woman and put her in the economy class box. He sees our company and puts us in the risky startup box. He's going to present Stalwart as the safe choice box. We're going to show them that his boxes are a prison and the future exists outside of them. She looked out the window at the endless dark. The flight to Geneva was 7 hours. It was more than enough time to lay the groundwork for dismantling an empire. As their commercial flight began its descent into Geneva, the morning sun glinted off the surface of the lake and the snow-capped peaks of the Alps. The view was serene, a stark contrast to the strategic machinations that had taken place at 30,000 feet. Liam had compiled a dossier that was both damning and illuminating. Gregory Sterling had a long history of conservative management, a trail of interviews where he praised traditional business structures and a LinkedIn profile filled with connections to other old guard executives. He was a creature of habit, a man who believed the past was the best predictor of the future. Marcus Thorne, on the other hand, was a fascinating paradox. An industrialist in his late 70s, he had built his empire on steel and shipping, but had spent the last decade becoming a fervent advocate for disruptive innovation and corporate responsibility. His favorite quote, repeated in dozens of interviews, was from an old naval admiral: "A ship is safe in harbor, but that is not what ships are built for." He despised arrogance and valued leaders who showed grace under pressure. He's looking for a partner who can navigate the storm, not one who thinks they can control the weather. Liam summarized as they gathered their belongings. "Then we'll show him a storm," Alara replied cryptically. They cleared customs with Swiss efficiency. As they walked into the main arrivals hall of Geneva Airport, Alara scanned the sea of chauffeurs holding signs. She ignored the one with Dr. Vance printed on it. Instead, she led Liam towards the sleek, separate terminal for private aviation. "Change of plans," she said, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "I had a feeling we might need to make a statement upon arrival." In the main terminal, Gregory Sterling was striding through arrivals with the air of a conquering hero. He had managed to put the embarrassing incident at JFK behind him, chalking it up to a simple misunderstanding. He probably imagined Dr. Vance struggling with her bags to find a taxi. He was already focused on the conference on the Helios presentation on crushing the upstart Etheria innovations. He followed the signs towards the taxi rank, barking orders into his phone. His path took him past a large floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the private tarmac, and that's when he saw it. Parked directly beside the terminal, gleaming in the alpine sun like a polished obsidian spear, was a Gulfstream G700. It was the apex predator of private jets, a $75 million symbol of global power and influence. Its pearl-white fuselage was marked with a simple, elegant logo, a stylized A that seemed to weave into an infinity symbol, the Etheria Innovations logo. Standing at the base of the jet's staircase, conversing with the pilot, was Dr. Alara Vance. She had swapped her flats for a pair of sharp heels and her laptop case for a luxurious leather tote. She looked completely in her element, the owner of a kingdom, not a mere visitor. A black Mercedes Maybach was purring silently nearby, the driver holding the door open for her. Greg Sterling stopped dead in his tracks. His phone slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the marble floor. The sound was lost in the airport's din, but in his mind it was a thunderclap. The woman he had tried to banish to the back of the plane didn't just fly first class. She flew in a class so far beyond his comprehension that it might as well have been a spaceship. That jet wasn't a rental, it wasn't a timeshare. The tail number, which he could just make out, was registered to an Etheria subsidiary. She owned it. He wasn't her peer. He wasn't even in the same league. He was a foot soldier, looking up at a queen on her throne. The foundation of his entire worldview, a carefully constructed hierarchy with men like him at the top, crumbled into dust in that single moment. Every assumption he had made about her was not just wrong. It was spectacularly, cosmically, laughably wrong. Alara, as if sensing his gaze, glanced over towards the main terminal. Her eyes, even from a distance, seemed to lock with his. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She simply held his gaze for a long, silent moment, then gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a greeting. It was a dismissal. Then she turned, ascended the steps into her waiting car, and was gone. Greg stood frozen, oblivious to the people swarming around him. The image of the jet of Alara's calm, powerful presence was burned into his retina. The humiliation at the gate was a minor sting. This was a mortal wound. He had picked a fight with a giant, armed with nothing but his own ignorance. As he fumbled to pick up his phone, a seed of pure, cold dread began to sprout in his stomach. The conference hadn't even started, and he had a terrifying feeling that he had already lost everything. The Geneva Global Tech Summit was the Davos of the technology world, a gathering of the planet's most influential minds. The air buzzed with talk of AI quantum computing and the next great disruption. Stalwart Dynamics had a respectable booth in the main exposition hall, a testament to their size and budget. But they were not the main event. They were part of the landscape, not the headline. The headline on the opening day was Dr. Alara Vance. She was the keynote speaker. Her talk, titled "The Quantum Leap Powering Tomorrow's World with Today's Conscience," was the most anticipated event of the summit. The grand auditorium was packed. CEOs, venture capitalists, and government ministers filled every seat. In the fifth row, looking small and insignificant in the vast crowd, sat Gregory Sterling. To his left sat his boss, the CEO of Stalwart Dynamics, a formidable man named Robert Harrison. And in the front row center seat was the man they all needed to impress Marcus Thorne. When Alara walked onto the stage, she commanded it instantly. There was no podium, just an open stage and a single microphone. She moved with a fluid grace, her presence both calming and electrifying. She began not with data or projections, but with a story about growing up in a neighborhood that suffered from frequent power outages, of seeing how a lack of reliable energy wasn't just an inconvenience, but a barrier to opportunity, to education, to dreams. She then seamlessly transitioned from the personal to the planetary. She didn't just present Etheria's technology, she wove a narrative of a future where energy was not a commodity to be hoarded, but a fundamental right. She explained the complex science of her company's solid-state energy storage with analogies so clear and compelling that everyone in the room felt like a physicist. For a century, she said, her voice resonating with passion and authority, we have operated on a model of extraction. We take from the earth, we burn, we transmit, we waste. This model is not just unsustainable, it is unintelligent. It is like trying to run a supercomputer with a steam engine. The future is not about bigger pipes. It's about a smarter network. A network that is decentralized, resilient, and above all, equitable. She never once mentioned stalwart dynamics. She didn't have to. Every word about the old model, about bigger pipes and steam engines, was a perfectly aimed shot at their entire business philosophy. She was positioning Etheria not as a competitor, but as the successor, the next evolutionary step. As she concluded, she looked out over the audience, her gaze sweeping across the front rows. The greatest risk is not in embracing new technology. The greatest risk is clinging to an old mindset. It is the failure of imagination, the inability to see the world not as it is, but as it could be. The leaders who will build the future are not those who are skilled at protecting the past, but those who have the courage to invent a new one. The auditorium erupted in a thunderous standing ovation. Marcus Thorne was on his feet, clapping enthusiastically, a look of profound admiration on his face. Robert Harrison, the stalwart CEO, applauded politely, but his jaw was tight, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He had seen the power of Alara's presentation and knew on a primal level that his company's pitch would sound dated and uninspired by comparison. Later that day, at the exclusive networking reception, the fallout began. Alara was the center of gravity in the room. A crowd of admirers and potential partners orbited her, while Liam expertly managed the flow of introductions. Gregory Sterling, desperate to undo the damage he had caused, saw his chance. He excused himself from a conversation and made a beeline for Alara, his face arranged in what he hoped was a charming, apologetic smile. "Dr. Vance," he began, his voice a little too loud. "A truly spectacular presentation. Absolutely brilliant." Alara turned to him, her expression neutral. The vibrant crowd around them seemed to melt away, leaving the two of them in a bubble of icy silence. "Mr. Sterling," she acknowledged him with a slight nod. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice. "I wanted to sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding at the airport. I was having a stressful day. I wasn't thinking clearly. I made an assumption, and I was completely out of line. I hope you can accept my apology." It was a textbook non-apology, placing the blame on stress and a misunderstanding rather than his own prejudice. Alara looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his. She saw no genuine remorse, only panicked self-preservation. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice soft but clear enough for those nearby to hear. "I don't recall a misunderstanding. I recall a moment of perfect clarity. You saw what you saw and you acted on it. I appreciate that you now have new information, but that doesn't change the nature of the original event." She then turned to the German energy minister, who had been waiting to speak with her. "Minister Schmidt, you were telling me about the wind farm initiatives near Hamburg. The cut was so clean, so precise, it was masterful. She hadn't yelled or caused a scene. She had simply dismissed him, rendering him utterly irrelevant. He was left standing alone, his hand half extended, his face burning with a fresh wave of humiliation. The people who had overheard the exchange looked away, their expressions ranging from pity to contempt. His boss, Robert Harrison, had witnessed the entire interaction from across the room. He slammed his champagne flute down on a nearby table. The quiet snap of the stem breaking was drowned out by the noise of the reception. But for Harrison, it was the sound of the Helios contract slipping through his fingers. He strode over to Greg, grabbed his arm in a vice-like grip, and dragged him towards the exit. "What in God's name did you do?" Harrison hissed his voice, a low, furious growl. The hard karma was just beginning to hit, and the shockwaves were about to bring Gregory Sterling's entire world crashing down. In the hyper-connected ecosystem of a global summit, information travels faster than a private jet. The story of the incident at JFK did not break on CNN or Twitter. It spread in a far more potent and damaging way through the Whisper network. It began with Liam, who under Alara's direction had confidentially shared the story with a well-connected venture capitalist he knew from Silicon Valley, framing it not as a complaint, but as a bizarre, almost amusing anecdote about the old guard's culture. The VC, a notorious gossip, shared it with a prominent tech journalist over cocktails. The journalist mentioned it to a government official. By the second day of the conference, the story was currency traded in hushed tones, in breakout sessions, and over espresso. Crucially, it wasn't framed as a simple story of racism. It was framed as a story of catastrophic misjudgment. The narrative was this. The senior VP of logistics for Stalwart Dynamics, a company bidding on the most complex logistics project in modern history, was incapable of correctly identifying the single most important person in his industry. The story was devastating because it was simple and visual. Everyone had seen Alara's keynote. They had seen her brilliance, her power, and now they could picture this pompous executive Gregory Sterling trying to send her to the back of the bus. It wasn't just offensive, it was in the context of their industry unforgivably stupid. The effect on Greg was immediate and brutal. People he had known for years suddenly became engrossed in their phones when he approached. Meetings he had scheduled were abruptly cancelled with vague excuses about sudden scheduling conflicts. At a round-table discussion on supply chain management, the moderator skipped over him for questions, and when he tried to interject, the other panelists simply talked over him. He had become a ghost, a pariah. The fallout for Stalwart Dynamics was even worse. Their brand, built on a reputation for stability and sound judgment, was now tainted by association with Greg's folly. Competitors and potential clients started looking at their leadership team and wondering who else there thinks like him. What other massive misjudgments are they capable of? Robert Harrison. The CEO was in full damage control mode. He had flown to Geneva to close a deal, and instead he was managing a self-inflicted PR nightmare. He confined Greg to his hotel room, like a grounded teenager, forbidding him from attending any more conference events. His fury was palpable in their suite at the Four Seasons. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Harrison roared, pacing the room, while Greg sat pale and shaken on the edge of an ornate sofa. "This isn't about your hurt feelings or her hurt feelings. This is about Marcus Thorne. He builds his empire on character. He just saw our character on full display, trying to kick the star of the whole damn show out of a boarding line. I apologized," Greg pleaded. "I tried to make it right." "You apologized to save your own skin," Harrison shot back. "She saw right through you. We're not just selling technology here, you idiot. We're selling trust. And you, our senior VP of logistics, proved you are fundamentally untrustworthy. You can't be trusted to read a room. You can't be trusted to read a person, and you sure as hell can't be trusted with a $2 billion project." A frantic call came in from Stalwart's headquarters in Houston. Their stock had taken a small but noticeable dip. It wasn't a crash, but it was a tremor. Analysts were beginning to attach leadership risk notes to the company in their morning briefs. The Whisper network had reached Wall Street. Harrison took the call, his face grim. "No, it's not under control," he snapped into the phone. "The damage is done. Now we have to see if we can salvage the wreckage." Meanwhile, Alara and her team operated with surgical precision. They never once acknowledged the incident publicly. When reporters asked about their rivalry with Stalwart, Alara would simply smile and say, "We're focused on our own technology. We believe our vision for the Helios project speaks for itself." Her refusal to engage to sling mud made her look even more powerful. She was above the fray. She didn't need to point out her rivals' flaws. She had created a situation where they were doing a spectacular job of imploding all on their own. The stage was set for the final presentation to the Helios Project Consortium. Stalwart Dynamics was walking into the room not as a titan of industry, but as a wounded animal bleeding credibility with every step. And Alara Vance was waiting, not with a weapon, but with a scalpel, ready to make the final decisive cut. The final presentation was held in a top-floor boardroom overlooking Lake Geneva. The room was intimidatingly minimalist, a long, dark mahogany table, 20 chairs, and a floor-to-ceiling screen at one end. Seated at the center of the table was Marcus Thorne, flanked by the other 6 board members of the Helios Consortium. Their faces were impassive, betraying nothing. The Stalwart Dynamics team, led by a visibly stressed Robert Harrison, went first. Gregory Sterling was on the team, but he was a shadow of his former self. He had been stripped of his speaking role and sat at the far end of the table, his sole purpose to answer technical logistics questions, if asked. He avoided making eye contact with anyone. Harrison gave a polished, if uninspired, presentation. He emphasized Stalwart's size, their decades of experience, their financial stability. He used words like guaranteed war, proven, and risk-averse. It was a presentation designed to soothe the nerves of conservative investors. But in the wake of Alara's dynamic keynote, it sounded plodding and anachronistic. It was the music of yesterday. When he finished, Marcus Thorne leaned forward. He didn't ask about their proposed energy conduits or their deployment schedules. He asked a question that cut right to the heart of the matter. "Mr. Harrison," Thorne said, his voice quiet, but carrying immense weight. "The Helios project is more than an infrastructure investment. It is a legacy project. It will define the continent's relationship with energy for the next century. This requires not just technical prowess, but a certain foresight, a culture of forward thinking. Tell me, how does Stalwart Dynamics ensure that your leadership is equipped to see the future and not just protect the past?" The question was a guided missile aimed directly at the Gregory Sterling fiasco. Harrison knew it. He stammered for a moment, launching into a flurry of corporate jargon about diversity initiatives, leadership seminars, and next-generation management training. It was a hollow, unconvincing answer, and everyone in the room knew it. Thorne listened patiently, his expression unreadable, before nodding slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison." Then it was Etheria's turn. Alara walked to the front of the room. Liam was with her, but she was the sole presenter. She began where her keynote had left off, midst Thorne, members of the board. She started, her voice calm and confident. "Stalwart Dynamics has told you they are the safe choice, and on paper their history is impressive. But we are not here to build the past. The greatest risk in a project of this magnitude is not failing to execute a known plan. It's failing to adapt to an unknown future." She laid out her vision, not just the technology, but the philosophy behind it. She spoke of a modular, adaptable grid that could evolve with new discoveries. She presented a financial model that was leaner, more agile, and offered a faster path to profitability. It was brilliant, audacious, and utterly compelling. Then came the final brutal move. The coup de grace she had been holding in reserve. "Stalwart's proposal," she said, pulling up a specific slide from their presentation, "is robust. It is also heavily dependent on a series of patented technologies for high-capacity energy transmission, particularly the patents held by a German research firm, Kepler-Stein Dynamics. Harrison and the stalwart team looked confused. Their exclusive licensing deal with Kepler-Stein was the bedrock of their technical proposal. "It's a fine company," Alara continued, her voice even. "So fine, in fact, that last month, Etheria Innovations felt they would make a valuable addition to our portfolio." She clicked to the next slide. It was a press release embargoed until that very morning. Etheria Innovations completes acquisition of Kepler-Stein Dynamics. A collective gasp went through the room. Robert Harrison's face went white. He looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. They hadn't just licensed the technology. Alara had bought the entire company out from under them. "We felt it was essential to control all key aspects of the Helios project's technological pipeline," Alara explained calmly. "As the new owners of these patents, we are of course prepared to honor a licensing agreement. However, we believe integrating them directly into our own proprietary systems offers a level of synergy and efficiency that a third-party arrangement simply cannot match." It was an act of breathtaking corporate warfare. She hadn't just out-talked them. She had outmaneuvered them on a scale they couldn't have even imagined. While they were preparing PowerPoint slides, she was buying the building blocks of their entire proposal. She had made their plan obsolete. Alara concluded her presentation. "We believe the choice is clear. You can partner with a company that sees the world through a rear-view mirror, or you can partner with the company that is building the road ahead." "Thank you." She returned to her seat. The silence in the room was absolute. Marcus Thorne looked at the stunned faces of the stalwart team. He then turned his gaze to Alara, who sat with a quiet, dignified poise. He saw in her not just a brilliant engineer or a savvy CEO, but the very embodiment of the foresight he had been asking about. A slow smile spread across his face. "Well," Thorne said, his voice booming in the quiet room, "I believe that answers my question about culture." The vote was a mere formality. The Helios project belonged to Etheria Innovations. The news of Etheria's victory didn't just ripple through the financial world. It was a tsunami. In the cold, pressurized silence of the stalwart Dynamics corporate jet on the flight back to Houston, the atmosphere was thick with the stench of failure. Robert Harrison, a man used to projecting power and control, stared out the window at the endless expanse of the Atlantic. But his eyes saw only the ruins of a multi-billion-dollar deal and the smoldering crater of his company's reputation. Gregory Sterling sat several rows back, utterly alone. His colleagues, who just days ago had been laughing at his jokes and seeking his approval, now treated him like a contagion. They would not meet his gaze. They spoke in hushed whispers, and when he cleared his throat to speak, the conversation would instantly die. He was a non-person, a ghost in a Gucci suit, trapped at 40,000 feet, with the architects of his demise. He had spent his life ascending the corporate ladder, only to be shoved from the very top. The fall was a long, silent, and lonely one. He arrived home to his sprawling house in the Woodlands, a wealthy Houston suburb, feeling hollowed out. The grand entryway, usually a symbol of his success, felt like a mausoleum. His wife asked him how the trip went, and for the first time in his life, he had no bravado, no bluster. He simply mumbled, "It didn't go well," and trudged into his home office. The email was already waiting in his inbox, sent from an impersonal HR address. The subject line was brutally efficient: notification of employment separation. The language within was a masterclass in corporate sterility. Words like restructuring, realignment of strategic priorities, and a catastrophic lapse in professional judgment were deployed to construct a legal fortress. He wasn't just being fired, he was being surgically excised from the company's history. His stock options were voided, his benefits terminated his access to the company's server, revoked effective immediately. The digital guillotine had fallen. He reread the line about reputational tomartoya 12 times. He, Gregory Sterling, who had prided himself on his sterling reputation, had become the company's official stain. He slumped in his leather chair, the silence of the room roaring in his ears. His world hadn't just changed, it had been deleted. In the weeks that followed, he discovered the true nature of his exile. He tried calling his contacts, the men he'd played golf with and shared expensive scotch with for decades. His calls went to voicemail. The few who did pick up were brief and distant. Headhunters who had once hounded him now sent polite but firm rejections. The market is just very competitive right now, Greg. We're looking for a candidate with a different cultural profile. He was radioactive. The whisper network that had condemned him in Geneva had followed him home, poisoning every well. His story had become a cautionary tale told over lunch at the River Oaks Country Club, a lesson in how one moment of unchecked arrogance could undo a lifetime of work. Meanwhile, Alara Vance was not celebrating. She was consolidating. From her sleek headquarters, she and Liam orchestrated the media strategy with the precision of a military campaign. When the Wall Street Journal requested an exclusive interview, Liam asked her how she wanted to play it. "We don't gloat, Liam," Alara said, looking at the mock-ups for the new Etheria Foundation logo. "Gloat is temporary. We educate. We use this as a teaching moment that also happens to be the best brand-building exercise we could ever ask for. We are not the company that won a fight. We are the company that represents the future." The resulting article was a masterclass in narrative control. The journalist, a Pulitzer Prize winner, asked her directly about the airport incident. Alara leaned forward, her expression not angry or triumphant, but thoughtful. "I've encountered attitudes like that my entire career," she said, her voice calm and measured. "In a way, I'm grateful for the experience. It was a perfect real-world stress test for two competing business philosophies. One philosophy looks at the world and sees a rigid hierarchy. It sees insiders and outsiders, and it spends its energy enforcing those boundaries. The other philosophy, our philosophy, sees a network. It believes talent, brilliance, and the next world-changing idea can come from anywhere, from anyone. The incident was unfortunate, but also clarifying. We didn't win the Helios contract in spite of that moment. We won because our entire corporate DNA is the antithesis of the thinking that leads to such moments. Our diversity isn't a quota we have to fill. It's the core of our competitive advantage. It allows us to see opportunities where others see only obstacles. She had turned a moment of personal humiliation into a global marketing triumph, defining her company as the inevitable, intelligent future. 3 months later, this philosophy was given a physical form. At a star-studded gala in New York, she officially launched the Etheria Foundation. Marcus Thorne himself flew in from Europe to give the introductory remarks. The Foundation's flagship program was the Vance Fellowship, a multi-million-dollar fund to provide seed capital and, more importantly, high-level mentorship to entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities in the STEM fields. Standing at the podium, Alara looked out at the assembled crowd of innovators, investors, and politicians. "For too long," she began, her voice ringing with conviction, "we have told our brightest young minds to get in line, to wait their turn, to fit into a box that was never designed for them. We have mistaken pedigree for potential and familiarity for competence. Tonight we say, no more. The Vance Fellowship is not about charity. It is about unlocking trillions of dollars in intellectual capital that our society has foolishly left on the table. We are not giving a handout. We are making the single greatest investment we can make, an investment in overlooked genius. To our future fellows, I say this: you will not be asked to get in line. We are here to help you build your own building. Months passed. Gregory Sterling was now working as a freelance logistics consultant, a dramatic step down. He took any contract he could get, mostly from smaller, less prestigious firms. His new office was often a table at a generic paid-entry airport lounge, a sad echo of the exclusive spaces he once commanded. One dreary afternoon, sitting in a Priority Pass lounge at Chicago O'Hare, nursing a lukewarm coffee, he glanced up at the muted television. It was a segment on CNBC about rising stars in technology. And there on the screen was Dr. Alara Vance. She wasn't alone. She stood with her arm around a brilliant young woman, a Latina engineer from East LA, who was the first recipient of the Vance Fellowship. The young woman was tearfully explaining how the fellowship's funding had allowed her to perfect a new low-cost water purification system that would save lives. Alara was beaming, not with the predatory smile of a corporate raider, but with the genuine pride of a mentor. She was a builder, a creator. Greg stared at the screen, the coffee turning to ash in his mouth. The full scope of his miscalculation crashed down on him. He had looked at this woman and seen someone trying to cut a line. He had failed to see that she wasn't just in the line. She was the architect of a whole new system, a better one that was now being broadcast to the world. He was a relic, a black-and-white photo in a high-definition world. He looked away from the screen, down at his own reflection in the dark, sticky surface of the table. A tired, defeated man who had earned his place in obscurity. Back in her office, Alara hung a new photo on her wall. It was the group shot of the first class of Vance Fellows, a dozen brilliant, hungry faces. She looked at them and then out the window at the sprawling city below. She thought back to that moment at JFK, the sting of humiliation, the cold fury. She realized then that Gregory Sterling had done her a favor. He had reminded her what she was fighting against. Not him, not one ignorant man, but the entire invisible architecture of prejudice and exclusion he represented. He thought he was a gatekeeper, but he had only inspired her to build a new, better gate and to hand the keys to a generation of people who would build a world he could never have imagined. And that was the most perfect, most constructive, most satisfying karma of all. Dr. Alara Vance's story is a powerful reminder that the battles we face are rarely just about the moment they occur. They're about the future we choose to build from them. She could have chosen anger. She could have chosen public shame. Instead, she chose strategy brilliance and a form of karma that wasn't just about tearing one man down, but about lifting thousands of others up. She proved that the most powerful response to prejudice is overwhelming success, and that the best way to break a glass ceiling is to build a whole new skyscraper. What do you think about her incredible strategy? Have you ever witnessed a moment of satisfying karma that changed everything? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story inspired you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more true stories of justice triumph and the incredible power of the human spirit. Thank you for listening.